Lieutenant Commander Alex Morrison stood in the observation deck of Coalition Station Kepler 442, his eyes fixed on the endless black beyond the viewport. 3 years he had served here, watching the border between known space and the unexplored regions where mysteries still waited. His duty was simple enough: monitor energy signatures, track ship movements, and report anything unusual to Coalition Command. Tonight, the sensors showed something that made his stomach twist with worry. Chief Science Officer Rachel Kim rushed into the observation deck, her data pad clutched tight in both hands. She was breathing hard, like she had run the whole way from the science lab. Alex turned to face her and saw the fear in her eyes before she spoke a single word. Rachel had studied dozens of alien species during her career, analyzed their biology and culture with calm precision, but right now she looked more scared than he had ever seen her. "The Valthine are under attack," Rachel said, her voice barely steady. "Multiple cities destroyed already. Their defensive fleet cannot hold much longer." She brought up the data on the main display, and Alex felt his heart sink as he watched the footage. The Valthine lived on floating platforms above their methane world, peaceful crystalline beings who had never known real war. Their cities sparkled like jewels in the toxic atmosphere, beautiful and fragile. Now those jewels were burning. "Who is attacking them?" Alex asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "The Kreth Dominion," Rachel replied. 20 warships appeared in their system 6 hours ago without warning. The Valthine tried to negotiate, but the Kreth just started firing. 17 cities are gone. Over 8 million dead so far. Alex closed his eyes for a moment. The Kreth believed only the strong deserved to exist among the stars, and they had chosen the gentlest species in the coalition to prove their point. Navigator Kyle Barnes joined them, his young face pale with shock. He had transferred to the station only 3 months ago, fresh from the academy and eager to serve. Now he was seeing what real crisis looked like. "Sir," he said to Alex, "Coalition Command has been notified. They are assembling a response fleet." Alex felt a flash of anger. "How long will that take?" he asked, though he already knew. Kyle swallowed hard. 3 weeks minimum. Most of our ships are scattered across 50 systems. 3 weeks meant the Valthine would all be dead. Alex had read their distress message, heard the desperate voices of people who had never heard anyone begging for help that would come too late. He thought about the Coalition Council, gathering in their chambers light years away to debate and discuss while millions died. The council valued procedure above all else, careful consideration of every option before taking action. That careful nature had kept peace for 3 centuries, but it also meant they could never act fast when speed mattered most. Rachel was staring at her data pad again, scrolling through data with quick movements of her fingers. "There might be another option," she said quietly. Alex looked at her and saw something in her expression that made him nervous. "What option?" he asked. Rachel brought up a star map showing the region near the Valthine system. "There is a human patrol group operating in this area. Task Force Phoenix. 6 ships under Commander Patricia Hayes. They are only 3 days away from Valthine space." The observation deck went silent. Kyle stared at Rachel like she had suggested something impossible. "The humans," he said. "But they are under quarantine. Earth is designated a Class 12 death world. Contact with humans requires council authorization, and we have never given it except for limited diplomatic exchange." Rachel nodded slowly. "I know the protocols, but the Valthine are dying right now. 3 days versus 3 weeks. The math is simple." Alex walked back to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Everyone in the coalition knew about Earth, the forbidden world where evolution had created something terrifying. Humans had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Predators, diseases, extreme weather, natural disasters that would end civilization on most worlds. The humans had not just survived but thrived, becoming apex predators themselves. When the Coalition first detected Earth's radio signals, the xenobiologists could not believe what they found. A species that hunted for sport, that fought wars for thousands of years, that turned everything into weapons. The Coalition had debated for decades about what to do with humanity. Some wanted to make contact, believing any intelligent species deserved recognition. Others argued for permanent quarantine, keeping the Deathworlders isolated until they either destroyed themselves or evolved past their violent nature. In the end, they had chosen careful observation. Earth was monitored constantly, but contact remained forbidden, except for one human observer allowed in Coalition space. Admiral Helena Grant, a woman with cold eyes who sat in council chambers and said nothing while everyone debated her species like they were discussing a dangerous animal. The Valthene had always supported humanity's inclusion in the Coalition. Their philosophers argued that consciousness itself was sacred regardless of origin. Elder Vethnar had given speeches about how fear of the unknown diminished everyone. Now those same Valthene were dying, and their only hope might be the very beings the Coalition feared most. Alex felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He was just a station commander with limited authority. Contacting humans without authorization would end his career at minimum. But doing nothing meant accepting mass murder. "Rachel, can you get me Admiral Grant's private communication channel?" Alex asked. Rachel looked up sharply. "That would be a direct violation of protocol." Alex nodded. "I know, but I need to speak with her. Not as Coalition command, just as someone who might be able to help." Rachel hesitated for only a moment before her fingers flew across her datapad. "I am sending you the encrypted channel now. What you do with it is your decision." Kyle stepped forward. "Sir, if you do this, they will court-martial you. The quarantine protocols are absolute." Alex smiled sadly. "Maybe. But I joined the Coalition to protect people, not to hide behind rules while they die." He walked to the communication station and entered the encryption code Rachel had sent him. The screen flickered for a moment before Admiral Grant's face appeared. She looked tired, like she had not slept in days. "Commander Morrison," she said calmly, "I assume this is not an authorized communication." Alex took a breath. "No, Admiral, it is not. But the Valthene are being slaughtered and the Coalition cannot respond in time. Your task force Phoenix is 3 days away. I know this violates every protocol, but those people do not have 3 weeks." Grant's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You understand what you are asking. If humans intervene, it changes everything." Alex thought about the Valthene families huddling in their crystal cities, watching death approach and knowing no help would come. He thought about the children who would never grow up, the artists who would never create again, the philosophers whose thoughts would die with them. "I am asking for help," he said simply, "not as Coalition command, but as someone who believes intelligence deserves protection." Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I will need to consult with Earth Command. But Commander Morrison, you should know that humanity has been waiting for an opportunity to prove ourselves. This might be that chance." The screen went dark. Alex turned to find Rachel and Kyle both staring at him. "What have I done?" he said quietly. Rachel walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe the right thing. Maybe the thing that will get you arrested. Either way, the Valthene have a chance now." Alex nodded and looked back out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human warships were preparing for battle, ships crewed by Deathworlders who had never backed down from a fight in their entire violent history. The galaxy had feared humanity's name for generations. Now they were about to see what that fear was built on. 12 hours after his unauthorized communication with Admiral Grant, Alex Morrison received a priority message marked for his eyes only. He opened it in his private quarters where nobody could see what it contained. The screen filled with technical specifications, tactical data, and command structures. His hands trembled slightly as he read through the information about Task Force Phoenix. 6 human warships that officially did not exist in Coalition records. The task force consisted of destroyers named Valkyrie and Tempest, frigates called Guardian and Sentinel, and support vessels Atlas and Prometheus. Each ship carried weapons that made Alex's blood run cold, railguns that could punch through battle armor like paper, missile systems with yields that seemed excessive for anything except planetary bombardment, point defense networks designed to create walls of fire around the ships. These were not exploration vessels dressed up with defensive weapons. These were warships built by people who understood war intimately. Commander Patricia Hayes led the task force according to the data. Alex studied her service record with growing respect and concern. She had commanded ships in the final conflicts before Earth unified its governments. Her tactics instructor scores were perfect. Her crew loyalty ratings were off the charts. She had been decorated 17 times for actions Alex could barely comprehend. Once she had held a damaged ship together through nothing but force of will and creative engineering for 6 days, while evacuating civilians from a failing space station. The woman was a legend among human military personnel. Rachel found him reading the files 2 hours later. She knocked on his door and came in when he did not answer. One look at his face told her everything. They agreed to help, she said quietly. Alex nodded. Task Force Phoenix is changing course. They will arrive at Valthene space in 3 days. Rachel sat down heavily in the chair across from him. Then we really did it. We broke every rule the Coalition has about human contact. Alex closed the datapad. The question is what happens next. What happened next came faster than either of them expected. Counselor Drethmar of the Zenthari Military Command discovered the communication within hours. The Zenthari were a hive species that valued order and hierarchy above everything. Drethmar arrived at the station with a security detail and official arrest warrants. Alex was placed in custody for violating quarantine protocols, unauthorized contact with restricted species, and breach of Coalition security. The charges carried penalties ranging from imprisonment to permanent exile from Coalition space. Rachel refused to let them take Alex without a fight. She pulled every regulation she could find, arguing legal interpretations with a fury Alex had never seen in her before. The quarantine protocols forbid Coalition forces from initiating contact with humans, she argued in front of Drethmar and his officers. But nothing in the protocols explicitly prevents humans from responding to a general distress call, broadcast on open frequencies. Commander Morrison simply informed Admiral Grant of the situation. What humans choose to do with that information is their decision. It was a technicality so thin Alex could see through it. But Drethmar hesitated because technicalities mattered in Coalition law. Rachel pressed her advantage. The Valthene broadcast their distress call on all open channels. Any ship in range would receive it, including human vessels. We cannot control who hears a public broadcast. Drethmar's compound eyes narrowed. You twist words like a politician, he said, but the law will judge your commander's actions. He left Alex in custody, but sent a message to the council that created political chaos. Overseer Talon Vor convened an emergency council session. The Zenthari leader was known for methodical thinking and careful judgment. He had guided the Coalition through 3 decades of peace by never making hasty decisions. Now he faced a situation where hesitation meant death for millions. Alex watched the proceedings through a security feed in his holding cell. The council chamber filled with representatives from 40 species, all talking at once about protocols and precedents and the danger of allowing humans into Coalition affairs. Admiral Grant sat in her observer seat, saying nothing while the council debated humanity, like they were discussing a plague that might spread if not contained. Her silence was more powerful than any speech. She simply waited with the patience of someone who knew words would accomplish nothing now. Only actions mattered. Alex understood that patience. Grant had spent years watching the Coalition fear her people. She would not beg for acceptance or defend human nature. She would let results speak for themselves. The debate raged for 6 hours. Some council members wanted to order the human ships to turn back immediately. Others argued that interfering with a humanitarian response would make the Coalition look heartless. A few species who had always supported human inclusion saw this as an opportunity to prove their point. The Valthene deserve help, one representative argued. If humans are willing to provide it when we cannot, what does that say about our values? Drethmar countered that allowing Deathworlders to establish military precedent would destabilize everything the Coalition had built. Talon Vor finally called for silence and made his decision. The Coalition would neither assist nor interfere with any human response to the Valthene distress call. If humans chose to act, they would do so without Coalition authorization, but also without Coalition opposition. It was a political masterpiece. If the humans failed, the Coalition could maintain they never authorized the action. If humans succeeded, the Council could claim they showed wisdom by not preventing humanitarian aid. Alex almost laughed at the cynical brilliance of it. Rachel managed to get communication access to speak with Commander Hayes. The video link connected and Alex saw a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes studying him through the screen. Commander Hayes, Rachel said, we have tactical data on the Kreth forces and Valthene defensive capabilities. Hayes nodded. Send everything you have. My tactical officer will begin planning engagement scenarios. Rachel forwarded the files and Hayes reviewed them with quick efficiency. Her expression never changed, but Alex saw her eyes narrow slightly at certain details about Kreth weapons ranges. Lieutenant Daniel Chen appeared beside Hayes, a younger man with the focused intensity of someone who lived for tactical problems. He started analyzing the data immediately, his fingers flying across virtual displays. Commander, he said, The Kreth have superior numbers, but their formation is overconfident. They are surrounding the remaining Valthene cities like they expect no resistance. If we approach from this vector and execute a rapid burn, we can be inside their perimeter before they react. Hayes studied the plan for maybe 30 seconds. Make it happen, she said. Chen disappeared to brief the other ships. What struck Alex about the exchange was the speed. No lengthy debate, no committee review, no risk assessment reports. Hayes looked at the problem, identified the solution, and gave orders. This was how militaries operated when lives were at stake. The Coalition's careful nature had advantages, but speed was not one of them. Human military culture had been forged in conflicts where hesitation meant death. They had learned to make fast decisions and accept the consequences. Rachel pulled up classified psychological profiles on human military personnel after the communication ended. Alex read through them with growing understanding. Humans did not just train for combat. They prepared for scenarios most species would consider nightmare fuel. Operating with hull breaches, fighting in toxic atmospheres, hand-to-hand combat in zero gravity, maintaining function while wounded. One section detailed something called acceptable losses, the human military concept that some casualties were necessary to achieve objectives. Most coalition species would surrender rather than accept such costs. Humans calculated it like any other variable. Kyle came to the holding cell with food and news. The Kreth have been informed that human forces are responding, he said quietly. War Master Zarn Kuhl sent a message calling humans primitive and promising to send their wreckage back as a warning. Alex took the food tray. Does he know anything about human military capability? Kyle shook his head. Kreth intelligence dismissed humans as backward because their technology is decades behind coalition standard in some areas. They think 6 small ships against 20 Kreth dreadnoughts is a joke. Alex thought about the weapon specifications he had read. The railguns that fired tungsten rods at impossible velocities, the missiles with warheads designed to crack battle armor, the defensive systems that could track hundreds of targets simultaneously. Human technology might look primitive, but it was built for one purpose: killing efficiently. The Kreth were about to learn that sometimes simple weapons in skilled hands were far deadlier than sophisticated systems operated by those who had never faced real combat. Rachel returned with a datapad showing the latest Valthene casualty figures. 9 cities remained now. The Kreth were taking their time, destroying one every few hours like they wanted to maximize the terror. Alex felt sick reading the reports. Millions dead already and millions more waiting for death to arrive. But now they had 3 days. 3 days for 6 human ships to cross the distance. 3 days for Commander Hayes and her crews to prepare for a battle against overwhelming odds. 3 days for the galaxy to discover what Deathworlders were really capable of when Task Force Phoenix dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Valthene system. Exactly 3 days after receiving the distress call, Commander Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, watching the tactical display update with sensor data. What she saw made her jaw tighten with controlled anger. 14 Valthene cities were burning in the methane atmosphere below. Debris fields marked where defensive platforms had once protected the cities. 20 Kreth warships sat in orbital positions around the remaining cities like predators surrounding wounded prey. Hayes opened a channel on all frequencies and spoke in flawless Valthene dialect. This is Commander Patricia Hayes of Earth Task Force Phoenix. We are responding to your distress call. Kreth forces, you will cease hostilities immediately and withdraw from this system. There was a moment of silence before laughter filled the communication channel. War Master Zarn Kuhl appeared on screen, a massive being covered in battle scars. 6 little human ships, he said with amusement. Earth must truly be desperate to send children to fight. Turn around and run home before we add your corpses to the Valthene dead. Hayes did not respond with words. She gave one order to her crew: execute approach pattern Delta. The Valkyrie and Tempest immediately accelerated toward the Kreth formation, at speeds that should have torn their hulls apart. Kreth sensors screamed warnings as the human destroyers pulled maneuvers impossible for coalition vessels. The ships turned and burned with deadly precision. Humans could withstand higher gravitational forces than most species. Their ships were built to take advantage of that biological reality. The first railgun salvo arrived before the Kreth could properly react. Tungsten rods launched at a significant fraction of light speed slammed into 2 Kreth cruisers. There were no energy signatures to warn targets, no charge-up time to allow evasion, just kinetic death arriving faster than detection. Both cruisers lost their primary weapon systems in the opening seconds. Zarnkul stopped laughing and started shouting orders, but his ships were already scrambling to respond to an attack that had blindsided them completely. While the destroyers drew Kreth attention, frigates Guardian and Sentinel slipped through the chaos using stealth systems that made them nearly invisible to sensors. Lieutenant Daniel Chen coordinated their approach from his tactical station. The frigates positioned themselves near the remaining Valthene cities and deployed defensive screens to protect civilian populations. It was a risk bringing themselves so close to potential targets, but Hayes had made it clear. Protecting civilians was priority one. Destroying the Kreth came second. Support craft Atlas and Prometheus began rescue operations immediately. They moved between damaged platforms, extracting survivors while the battle raged around them. Hayes watched the rescue data update on her screen and felt grim satisfaction. Every life saved justified the risk. The Valthene had done nothing to deserve this attack. Humanity would not stand by and watch innocents die when they had the power to help. That simple moral principle drove everything they did here. The Kreth finally organized a proper response. 8 warships broke formation to engage the Valkyrie and Tempest. Energy weapons filled space with deadly fire. The human destroyers twisted through the barrage with moves that seemed to violate physics. Hayes felt the acceleration forces pressing her into the command chair. 6 gravities of sustained burn would incapacitate most species. Humans just gritted their teeth and kept fighting. The tactical display showed damage warnings across both destroyers, but neither ship broke off the attack. Commander Morrison watched the battle from his holding cell on station, Kepler 442. Rachel had rigged a feed so he could see what his decision had unleashed. What horrified him was not the violence but the precision. Every human action served a clear purpose. The destroyers were not just attacking randomly. They were forcing the Kreth to choose between defending themselves and maintaining their positions over the Valthene cities. Every time the Kreth tried to target the hidden frigates, the destroyers would savage their flanks. It was like watching a chess master play against amateurs. Kyle stood beside Morrison, watching the feed with wide eyes. "They are taking damage," he said quietly. "The Tempest just lost half its forward armor. Why don't they withdraw?" Morrison understood even if Kyle did not. Human ships were designed with battle damage in mind. Compartmentalization, redundant systems, crews trained to operate in compromised environments. A coalition ship at 70% integrity would retreat to safety. Human ships fought until they physically could not continue. It was not bravery or stupidity. It was simple calculation. Mission success mattered more than perfect preservation. 4 hours into the engagement, the tactical balance shifted. The Kreth had lost 6 vessels outright, and another 5 were limping away with critical damage. Task Force Phoenix had taken hits, but all 6 ships remained combat effective. The Tempest was operating with exposed sections, and her crew was fighting in damaged compartments with emergency life support. The Sentinel had burn marks across her hull from near misses. But they were still in the fight, and the Kreth were starting to realize they had badly miscalculated this encounter. Zarnkul tried to rally his forces, but fear had replaced arrogance in his commands. These were not primitive ships crewed by backward species. These were weapons platforms operated by beings who understood warfare at a level the Kreth had never truly faced. Human tactical doctrine was brutal in its efficiency. Take damage to deliver damage. Accept losses to achieve objectives. Never retreat while the mission remained incomplete. It was the philosophy of predators who had clawed their way to the top of their world's food chain through pure determination. Hayes saw the moment the Kreth broke. Their formation collapsed as ships began moving toward the system's jump point. She immediately ordered the Valkyrie to block their escape route. The destroyer accelerated into position between the Kreth flagship and Freedom. Zarnkul found himself facing an impossible choice: fight through a ship that refused to acknowledge its damage or surrender to beings his propaganda had called inferior. The warrior pride that defined Kreth culture warred with the survival instinct that kept species alive. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. The Valkyrie sat between the Kreth and escape with her weapons locked on the flagship. Hayes broadcast on open channels. "War Master Zarnkul, you have one chance to save your remaining ships. Order them to drop weapons and withdraw from this system. If you refuse, I will destroy every single vessel here." It was not a bluff, and everyone knew it. The human commander would absolutely follow through regardless of the cost to her own ships. That certainty came through in every word she spoke. Zarnkol's face appeared on screen. His expression held hatred but also grudging respect. "You fight well for primitives," he said. "Perhaps we underestimated Earth." Hayes's response was ice cold. "You underestimated compassion? You thought mercy was weakness. Now you know the truth. The strongest warriors are those who fight to protect rather than destroy." The Kreth vessels powered down their weapons and began moving toward the jump point. Hayes kept the Valkyrie in position until the last enemy ship disappeared into faster-than-light travel. The moment the Kreth were gone, Hayes shifted all attention to humanitarian operations. Medical teams deployed to assist the Valthene despite the physiological differences. Engineer crews worked alongside Valthene technicians to restore critical systems. The Atlas and Prometheus continued rescue operations until every survivor was accounted for. Hayes walked through her ship checking on her crew. 43 had died in the engagement. Another 72 were wounded. She memorized every name and face. Command meant accepting responsibility for those losses. Rachel turned away from the feed with tears on her face. Morrison asked if she was all right, and she nodded slowly. "I spent my whole career studying species from safe distance," she said, "writing papers about biology and culture. But I never understood what courage really meant until today. Those humans knew they might die. They came anyway because someone needed help." Morrison thought about his own decision to contact Admiral Grant. Maybe that was what separated civilization from barbarism. Not technology or culture, but the simple choice to help when help was needed. Kyle pulled up casualty figures for both sides. The Kreth lost 8 ships completely destroyed and 12 more damaged beyond immediate repair. The Valthene lost 14 cities and over 11 million people before the human intervention. But 9 cities survived because 6 human ships had answered their call. The mathematics were brutal and clear. Every hour of delay would have meant another city destroyed. The Coalition's 3-week response time would have resulted in total extinction. Morrison felt vindication and horror in equal measure. He had been right to act, but the cost of that action weighed heavy on his conscience. Commander Hayes received a transmission from Elder Vethnar, the highest-ranking surviving Valthene leader. The elderly crystalline being appeared on screen with light refracting through fractures in their body from the attack. "On behalf of my people, thank you," Vethnar said simply. "You came when others could not. You risked everything for strangers. We will never forget this debt." Hayes shook her head. "There is no debt, Elder. Any decent species would have done the same. We just happened to be close enough." 2 days after the battle ended, Rachel Kim traveled to Valthene orbit aboard a Coalition medical vessel. She had volunteered to help coordinate humanitarian efforts despite having no direct authority to do so. When she arrived at the human ships, what she witnessed challenged everything her academic training had taught her about humanity. The wounded were joking with each other despite serious injuries. The medical bay operated with calm efficiency even while treating combat trauma. A young ensign named Lisa Wright, who had lost her arm in a decompression event, was asking the medical staff when she could return to duty. Rachel stood in the doorway watching the scene unfold and felt tears she could not explain. These people had nearly died defending strangers, and their primary concern was getting back to work. She approached Wright carefully and asked if she needed anything. The young woman looked surprised by the question. "Just a prosthetic and clearance to return to my station," she said with a smile. "We still have rescue operations running and my team needs me." Rachel realized then that she had spent years studying humanity from books and data. She had never truly understood them until this moment. Commander Hayes found Rachel in the observation deck hours later. The older woman looked exhausted, but her eyes remained sharp. "Dr. Kim," Hayes said, "thank you for coming to help." Rachel shook her head. "I should be thanking you. Your people saved millions of lives." Hayes walked to the viewport and stared out at the damaged Valthene cities below. "We did what anyone should do when they see people in danger." Rachel studied the commander's profile. Most Coalition species would have calculated the risk and chosen safety. Hayes glanced at her. "Then perhaps the Coalition needs to reconsider what strength really means. The political consequences of the human intervention spread like fire through Coalition space." Counselor Drethmar demanded immediate sanctions against Earth and the arrest of everyone involved in violating the quarantine. But Elder Vethnar addressed the council directly from his damaged city. The Valthene formally petitioned for humanity to receive recognition as a Coalition protectorate species, eligible for eventual full membership. It was a political calculation that left the Council in an impossible position. Rejecting the Valthene request would alienate one of the Coalition's founding members. Accepting it meant acknowledging that the Deathworld quarantine had been wrong. Morrison faced his tribunal 3 weeks after the battle. He stood before a panel of Coalition officers and presented his defense without apology. He admitted to technical violations of protocol, but argued that following rules while millions died would have been a greater moral failure. The prosecution presented evidence of his unauthorized communication. Morrison did not deny it. He simply asked the panel one question. If your families were dying and help was available, would you want someone to follow procedure or save them? The question hung in the air unanswered. Admiral Grant testified on Morrison's behalf. She revealed something that shocked the tribunal. Human military command had been monitoring Coalition communications for months, waiting for an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's value as potential allies. The Valthene crisis provided that opportunity, but the decision to respond came from Earth's civilian government, not just military command. We knew this might be our only chance to prove ourselves, Grant said calmly. Commander Morrison simply helped that chance arrive sooner. His actions saved millions and showed both our species what cooperation could achieve. In private conversation after the testimony, Rachel asked Hayes about human military philosophy. They were alone in a conference room with privacy screens active. Hayes was quiet for a long moment before responding. We understand why the Coalition fears us, she said finally. We mirror their own historical nightmares about powerful forces acting without restraint. But humanity learned something from our violent past. Strength without compassion is tyranny. Compassion without strength is naivete. The balance between those extremes defines whether a civilization deserves to wield power. We hope the Coalition can learn that lesson without repeating our mistakes. The casualty reports from Task Force Phoenix painted a harsh picture of the battle's cost. 43 crew members dead, another 72 wounded with injuries ranging from minor to severe. The frigate Sentinel needed months of repairs. The Tempest had operated throughout the engagement with exposed sections, her damage control teams working in bottled air while maintaining weapon systems. Hayes read each casualty report personally and wrote letters to families explaining how their loved ones had died. It was the burden of command she accepted without complaint, but never without grief. Kyle visited Morrison in his cell regularly to provide updates on Coalition reaction to the battle. The young navigator had changed since watching the engagement. His initial fear of humanity had transformed into something like respect. He told Morrison about analysis of the battle tactics that was circulating through Coalition military channels. Human combat doctrine was being studied by every species with defensive forces. They are calling it the Deathworlder doctrine, Kyle said. Accept damage to deliver damage. Maintain mission focus above preservation. Protect civilians even at cost to military assets. Some species find it horrifying. Others are realizing it is devastatingly effective. The Kreth Dominion responded to their defeat with predictable aggression. They declared humanity a priority target and vowed revenge for the humiliation at Valthene. But intelligence reports suggested internal conflict within the Dominion. Many Kreth military leaders were questioning War Master Zarnkul's competence. The supremacy ideology that drove Kreth expansion was showing cracks. If humans could defeat them so thoroughly, perhaps might did not automatically make right. Perhaps there were forms of strength the Kreth had failed to understand. 6 weeks after the battle, the Coalition Council reached its decision. Morrison was found guilty of protocol violations but sentenced to time served and reassignment rather than imprisonment or exile. He would become the first Coalition officer assigned to permanent liaison duty with Earth Space Command. His mission was to build understanding between human and Coalition military doctrine. Rachel volunteered to join him as Chief Xenocultural Advisor. Kyle requested transfer to the program as well. Together they would form the Coalition Human Integration Office, headquartered on a new joint station above Earth's moon. The Valthene held a memorial ceremony for those lost in the attack and those who came to their aid. Elder Vethnar unveiled a monument in orbit around their world, a crystalline structure that refracted light in patterns representing both Valthene and human values. Courage, compassion, sacrifice, and hope interweaved in the design. The 43 human crew members who died defending strangers were honored alongside millions of Valthene victims. Hayes attended the ceremony and read their names aloud. Her voice remained steady despite the weight of command losses. When Hayes finished reading the names, Elder Vethnar added the human dead to the Valthine remembrance crystals. "Your warriors gave their lives for people they never met," the elder said. "They asked nothing in return. They expected no reward. They simply saw beings in need and chose to help. This is the highest form of courage. We will remember them as long as Valthine civilization exists." Hayes saluted the monument and returned to her ship. There was work still to do and memorials would not bring her crew back. But she believed they had died for something that mattered. Rachel spent her final days at the Valthine system, documenting everything for her reports. She interviewed human crew members about their experience. She spoke with Valthine survivors about what they had witnessed. She compiled tactical data and cultural observations into the most comprehensive analysis of human military capability ever produced by coalition science. When she finished, she realized her career had fundamentally changed. She could never go back to distant academic observation. She had seen humanity up close under the most extreme circumstances possible. Now she wanted to help bridge the gap between her people and theirs. Hayes held a final briefing with her senior officers before Task Force Phoenix departed the Valthine system. They had spent 8 weeks helping with reconstruction efforts. Now they were being reassigned to joint patrol operations with coalition vessels. The presence of human ships would serve as both deterrent and symbol. Lieutenant Chen presented updated tactical protocols for mixed fleet operations. Engineer Lisa Wright, now fitted with a prosthetic arm, reported on standardization efforts for coalition and human technology. The work of integration was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid in blood and sacrifice. Morrison's transport to Earth departed from Station Kepler 442 with full honors. The station crew who had arrested him weeks ago now saluted as he left. Drethmar was not there to see him off, but many others were. They had watched him risk everything for what he believed was right. They had seen the results of that risk. Not everyone agreed with his actions, but everyone understood them now. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking rules. Sometimes saving lives mattered more than following procedure. These were lessons the coalition was slowly learning. Rachel stood beside Morrison as their transport accelerated toward Earth. She looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed in just 2 months. 3 months after the battle at Valthine, Overseer Talon Vor stood before the assembled Coalition Council to announce a decision that would reshape galactic politics. Earth would be granted provisional membership status, an unprecedented classification that recognized humanity's capabilities while maintaining oversight during integration. The quarantine would end immediately, replaced by a structured exchange program. Human vessels could operate in Coalition space under specific conditions. Coalition species could visit Earth with proper authorization. The announcement triggered reactions ranging from celebration to outrage, but the decision was final. Talon Vor presented the decision personally to Admiral Grant in a private ceremony. He acknowledged that fear of the unknown had nearly cost the Coalition both the Valthine and a potential alliance with humanity. "The true test of civilization is not avoiding danger," he said. "It is choosing how to respond when danger emerges. You and your species passed that test. Now we must prove ourselves worthy of your partnership." Grant accepted the decision with quiet dignity. She had waited years for this moment but showed no triumph. Only relief that her people would finally have a chance to prove themselves beyond the battlefield. Commander Morrison officially took command of the Coalition Human Integration Office on a cold morning when Earth's moon hung low in the sky outside the station windows. Rachel stood beside him as they reviewed their assignments. The office would coordinate military exchanges, scientific cooperation, and cultural programs. It was an enormous responsibility built on the foundation they had helped create. Morrison thought about his decision to contact Grant all those months ago. He had risked everything on the belief that some rules deserved breaking. Now that risk had become his life's work. Kyle arrived for his first day wearing a hybrid uniform that combined coalition and human elements. The young navigator had grown considerably since watching the Valthine battle. His fear of humanity had transformed into genuine respect and curiosity. He wanted to learn from the species that had redefined his understanding of courage. Morrison assigned him to work with human tactical officers, studying coalition defensive systems. The goal was to find ways both approaches could complement each other, rather than remaining separate and suspicious. Rachel began organizing the first cultural exchange program. Volunteers from 12 coalition species had applied to visit Earth despite the dangers. They would be carefully monitored and protected from the Deathworld's most extreme hazards. But they would also experience firsthand what had shaped humanity. Walking in gravity that made every movement exhausting, breathing air thick with oxygen, feeling weather that could kill in hours without proper protection, understanding the environment that forged the Deathworlders would help coalition species see humans as products of circumstance rather than inherently violent beings. Commander Hayes received new orders 6 months after the Valthian rescue. Task Force Phoenix would lead the first joint exploration mission into uncharted space. Her crew would include volunteers from 8 coalition species working alongside human personnel. The mission parameters were straightforward. Map unknown systems, make first contact with any discovered civilizations, and demonstrate that humans and coalition species could operate effectively together. Hayes reviewed the volunteer files with careful attention. Each coalition crew member had undergone extensive training in human procedures. Each human had studied coalition cultures and protocols. The integration process was not smooth or easy. Cultural misunderstandings happened regularly. Human directness offended species that valued elaborate courtesy. Coalition consensus building frustrated humans accustomed to rapid decision-making. Minor conflicts erupted over everything from meal schedules to command structures. But both sides kept working through the problems because the alternative was returning to suspicious isolation. Morrison spent his days mediating disputes, explaining cultural contexts, and building the bridges that would eventually become strong enough to support real partnership. Rachel published her comprehensive analysis of human military capability and cultural values. The document became required reading for coalition military academies and diplomatic schools. She detailed how Earth's hostile environment created selection pressures for resilience, adaptability, and social cooperation. She explained how human warfare had evolved from tribal conflicts to global cooperation through painful experience. She argued that humanity's violent history gave them unique perspective on the cost of conflict and the value of peace. The galaxy needed to understand humans as complete beings rather than simplistic threats. Earth scientists began sharing their knowledge of surviving hostile environments with coalition researchers. Techniques developed for extreme weather prediction helped protect vulnerable colonies. Medical procedures designed to treat trauma in dangerous conditions saved lives across coalition space. Agricultural methods created for poor soil and harsh climates enabled food production on marginal worlds. Humanity had accumulated generations of practical knowledge about survival. Now that knowledge benefited species who had never faced such challenges. The exchange went both ways as coalition science opened new frontiers for human exploration and development. The Kreth Dominion remained hostile, but their threats seemed increasingly hollow. Intelligence reports suggested major internal divisions. Many Kreth military leaders were questioning the supremacy ideology that had led to such devastating defeat. A faction was arguing for diplomatic engagement with the coalition. Another wanted to rebuild their fleet and seek revenge. The internal conflict paralyzed Kreth decision-making. Morrison tracked these developments carefully. Eventually, the Dominion would have to choose a path forward. Whether they chose peace or continued conflict would depend on factors beyond anyone's control. Kyle sat with Morrison in the observation deck late one night discussing the changes they had witnessed. The young navigator had just returned from 3 months working with human tactical instructors. "They are not what I expected," Kyle said. "I thought they would be aggressive and impatient. But they are also thoughtful and careful. They plan everything in detail. They consider consequences. They feel grief for losses even when missions succeed." Morrison smiled. "That is what the coalition never understood. Humans are dangerous because they evolved on a dangerous world. But they are also compassionate for the same reason. They know what suffering feels like." Rachel organized a symposium where human and coalition scientists presented joint research projects. The presentations covered everything from xenobiology to stellar dynamics to cultural anthropology. What struck Morrison about the event was how naturally the scientists collaborated. Shared curiosity transcended species differences. A Valthian crystallographer worked with a human materials engineer to develop new composite materials. A Zenthari mathematician and human physicist had solved equations that neither could complete alone. Science was becoming the bridge between worlds in ways politics could only dream about. Admiral Grant took Morrison to Earth's surface for the first time on a clear autumn day. They stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean while winds strong enough to knock over most coalition species barely moved them. "This is what made us," Grant said. "This constant struggle just to exist. Every human alive carries the legacy of ancestors who survived when survival seemed impossible. We are not inherently violent. We are inherently resilient. Violence was simply the tool our world demanded we master." Morrison watched waves crash against rocks below and finally understood. Fear of humanity had always missed the point. The question was never whether humans could fight, but whether they would choose peace when given the option. Task Force Phoenix departed on its exploration mission 8 months after the Valthene rescue. Hayes stood on the Valkyrie's bridge surrounded by both human and coalition crew members. Lieutenant Chen coordinated navigation with a Zenthari tactical officer. Engineering teams included 3 species working together on power distribution. Medical Bay had specialists in human, Valthene, and 4 other physiologies. The ship felt different now with so many voices and perspectives. But Hayes believed that diversity made them stronger rather than weaker. They would face unknowns together. The final transmission from Task Force Phoenix before they entered uncharted space was brief, but meaningful. Commander Hayes to Integration Office. All systems operational, crew working effectively together. Beginning exploration sequence. We go together. Those last 3 words captured everything about the new era. Humanity was no longer isolated and feared. The coalition was no longer paralyzed by caution. Together they were building something neither could achieve alone. Partnership forged in crisis was becoming cooperation, built on mutual respect. Morrison stood in the observation deck watching the stars and thinking about the journey that had brought him here. He had violated protocols to contact Admiral Grant because he believed some lives mattered more than rules. That decision had nearly destroyed his career, but instead had given him purpose beyond anything he had imagined. Building bridges between species with such different histories was the hardest work he had ever undertaken. But it was also the most important. The alternative was letting fear and suspicion define the future. Rachel joined him.